Today we're doing something very different. We're going to try to match or come as close as we can to the vocal processing for the Vecna demon from Stranger Things. So it's a little tough because we have to use my own voice as opposed to having somebody very talented who can get you a good starting point, but that's okay. We'll see what we come up with, and hopefully it's relatively close. So it's a very cool and unique sound, and we'll try to match it. Let's do it. First things first, you always want to start off with a reference, and you normally would want to use a clean reference. And I know there are clean references you could probably take from the show, but because I haven't finished the season, I didn't want to get spoiled. So I just took a little piece from the Kate Bush, running down that hill part of the show where Vecna is talking. That's going to make this a little more challenging because it's not super clean, but that's totally fine. We're not trying to get this absolutely perfect, but having a reference is always going to be useful because you can kind of go and A/B it or notice if something is way, way off with what you're doing. And then the second thing, and really the most important thing, is your source material or your starting point. Sadly, all we could do was use my voice, and I just took a few of the lines from the reference and I repeated those lines and then kind of spaced out a little bit. So here's what we're starting with, and then I'll show you the very first little things that I did.
They can't help you, Max. There's a reason you hide from them. You belong here with me.
So that is beyond cringy and very painful for me to listen to, but hopefully by the time we're done with this, it will sound really cool. So it's worth suffering through the cringe to get to the cool result. So what I've done here is I have gone in and done a little bit of just straight up gain tweaking and a little bit of automation to get rid of any additional click sounds. And also on the initial recording, there were certain things that were just way louder than they needed to be. So when we get to that point of doing limiting or multi-band compression or regular compression, we're not hitting it too hard at certain moments. So that's one of those things that's important. You want to do it, but you don't want to go to the point where it becomes obvious. So as an example here, I can get rid of these, and let's listen to why I did this.
You hide from them. You hide from them.
So that's peaking out way more than the rest. However, if I bring this back in,
you hide from them. You hide from them.
So you can hear that the gain is being automated there, but I wouldn't want to take this all the way down like this and completely match it.
You hide from them.
Because then it really starts to peak out and become noticeable that you've done something like that. So I don't want to lose too much, but at the same time, I need to slightly pull it back because I know what's going to be coming. So here is our starting point. Here's our audio recording. I'm going to bounce this out, and then we're going to get into the actual processing. The first big decision that I had to make was the pitch shift. How do I want to accomplish that? How far do I want to go with it? In the reference, it actually sounds very human and very organic. So much of that has to do with the actor's voice, the timbre, the natural kind of demonic and intimidating and scary nature that it possesses. My voice doesn't have that. And I also hammed it up when I recorded it and was way lower than my actual voices. And so for that reason, I was very careful to not go too far. The further you drop the pitch, the less organic it's going to sound, and it actually is going to have less of that overall spooky, scary effect because it starts to detach away from sounding human. And there's a big part of this, and a big part of the fear is that it still does kind of sound human. That's going to make it a little bit scarier. You can see that I just chose one of the modes in here, and I actually experimented with pretty much everything, and this was what I came up with and what I was happiest with. So you can see these various settings here, and let's just go ahead and take a listen.
They can't help you, Max. There's a reason you hide from them.
kind of sounds a little bit too Darth Vader for my liking. It's kind of losing some of the human quality, but we're going to try to bring it back with various processors, specifically kind of EQ. We can focus in on the more intelligible human speech frequencies and see if we can pull away from that Darth Vader ventilator sound a little bit. That being said, again, like so much of this comes down to the voice performance at the beginning. That's the make or break in this whole process. That being said, in real life, if you were working on a movie or something, you would want to use a plugin to do your pitch shifting so that you could create a chain that could be used anywhere. In our case here, because we have this control on this one thing, we're not going to do that. But just as an FYI, it would be smarter to probably use a plugin if you were actually working on a movie or whatever. Okay, so let's look at the processing. And all of this processing is just trying to clean things up and control it for when we get to go into the more creative stages next. So the first thing I have is just a high pass and a low pass filter with pretty steep curves, as you can see at 36 dB. This is to eliminate some artifacts from the pitch shifting that are being brought in. And also for a voice like this, we do not need any super, super highs. So let's try to get rid of those here. And you can see how I have these set up. This is set up pretty much all the way to like 11K. So with a steep filter, it is taking off a decent amount of that sheen at the top. And this filter here is doing a good job of cleaning up any subsonics that might have been brought in from the recording itself or also from the pitch shifting that we've done.
They can't help you, Max. There's a reason you hide from them.
Okay, so very straightforward, just easy peasy. The next thing I added in, and again, this was to try to help with any of the artifacts that have come in from the pitch shifting, is the RX declick. So I'm not actually using this to control like the declicks, the natural ones, but the unnatural things that have been brought in. And this is actually doing a pretty significant amount of work. So we'll listen to just the clicks. So that's pretty much all stuff that I want to get rid of. It's just gobbledygook, honestly. So now let's go ahead and put this back in.
They can't help you, Max.
Okay, get an idea for that. Now, the next thing that we have is another instance of the Pro Q, and it's doing a couple things. It's trying to start to tame the S thing in Max, and it's worth noting as well that it's like really extreme. It really pokes out. So it's one of these cleanup works that we're going to be constantly going back to and trying to fix, and I'm sure it's something that we'll look at in later stages as well. I've done a very aggressive kind of volume sweep out for that final Max part, and that's what that's doing there, but we still have to address it with our processing. So here with our Pro Q, we're getting rid of some of the low end, or at least we're taming it. It's something we're going to bring back later on, but at this point it's kind of out of control. It's too much. So I'm going to bring that back down to try to get a more neutral sound and then also start to control the S's.
They can't help you, Max.
There you can see it really working. Does a great job for that, especially because you have that great analyzer there to help you. We're then going into a de-esser that I played around with a lot. So I don't think I've ever set it up like this before, and it's pretty aggressive and it's catching a lot of things that aren't really S's or whatever. But again, it's useful for me to control the overall level of the frequencies that are in this band here. And where it's really problematic is like, I think it's around 4.8, 4.9, and then again around 7.8K, both those areas. And so it's going to grab both of those things. And let's go ahead and take a listen to this.
They can't help you, Max.
Very nice.
There's a reason you hide from them.
And it's very aggressive, okay? It's doing a lot, but because we've done all that pitch shifting and other things, it's not going to make it sound lispy. It just, that wouldn't happen. So the next thing that we have is an instance of soothe, which again, we're going to target that SE range, specifically the one more around that 4.6 range.
They can't help you, Max.
Right there. And so with all of these things on and off, let's listen to it. It's going to sound a lot quieter, but it's going to be a lot more controlled as well.
They can't help you, Max. They can't help you, Max.
Okay, and you might be thinking you prefer the version with all of those things out. I do as well, if that was supposed to be our final product at the end. But because we're going to be doing the creative stuff later, this is giving me something way more neutral. Okay, the final thing that I've added in here before we go further is a vocoder, but it's not a vocoder that you're supposed to audibly be able to really hear it doing its thing. I'm using it to try to get me a little bit more of that like guttural type sound, like as if you have a larger throat. That's sort of how I have this thing set up. And you can see that with the Bitwig one, I'm all the way up at 80 bands, narrower kind of Q range. I've brought the bandwidth up higher, a little bit here to the brightness. And this is a lot of kind of trial and error, but I didn't want it to be super obvious. In our case here, our carrier is brown noise. Didn't need to change that. That was perfect for what I wanted. Let's listen to what this sounds like.
They can't help you, Max.
Okay, so even there at 100%, it's not as extreme as like, you know, a Daft Punk style vocoder that you associate with vocoding. Oh, the other thing worth mentioning, stereo. That's going to be a big part of this. It's a big part of the reference too. So let's bring this back closer to around like 40%. And now let's take a listen.
They can't help you, Max. They can't help you, Max. They can't help you, Max.
And that's going to be a big help for us moving forward. So I really am happy that I decided to bring this in and use it. So you can see that it started to give us a little bit of that stereo width, and we're going to be able to enhance that as we move forward. So here is where we are at. Let's go ahead and again with everything off.
They can't help you, Max.
Still has the pitch shift, obviously. And then with everything on.
They can't help you, Max.
Okay, so happy with where we're at. And now we're going to go ahead and try to take it even further. We're now ready to look at more of the creative choices that we've made here, the more sound designy stuff. And of course, our voice doesn't sound that similar to the reference, and so I've had to pitch it more than I'd probably want to. That being said, these techniques should be useful and are things you could apply across the board if you're going for this kind of more demonic sound that still has some organic human qualities to it. The first thing we've added is the R bass, and we don't want to go crazy with this or it can like really muddy things up. But basically, it's just kind of creating this sound and this timbre that's not human. Like the human voice wouldn't be able to do this in terms of that lower range, but with this, we can kind of enhance it without going too far. So it's better heard than explained. You can see I set the frequency at 88.
They can't help you, Max. They can't help you, Max.
And off.
They can't help you, Max.
So it makes it a little bit muddy, but it's still relatively clean. So that's a classic for doing this sort of effect. There's other plugins that do it, but sometimes the originals are still the best. The next thing we have is just a very basic chorus, the Bitwig chorus. You can see that the mix percentage is very low. So it's just to start to enhance the stereo width of this. And we're going to be doing some other things to take that further.
They can't help you, Max.
Very subtle at this point.
They can't help you, Max. They can't help you, Max.
That will be more audible in headphones. And let's just go ahead and take this to like 50-50 or go higher so you can hear what it's doing, what the settings are.
They can't help you, Max. They can't help you, Max.
And when you do actually listen to the original, it is wider. So we are going to be taking this further out. But I figured it would be better accomplished using multiple plugins than just using the standard Bitwig chorus. But if we were to take this mix percentage higher, that would get us pretty close. But we're trying to go for a little bit finer detail. And we also want to pay homage to the 80s a little bit. And you'll see that with some of the plugins that we've used. The next thing we have is the Bitwig frequency shifter. This is to add kind of like a vibrato type effect, but an inhuman vibrato. And again, you kind of hear this in the original. You can kind of hear that there's a sort of quality to it. And that's what this frequency shifter is doing. Again, it's only on here at 10%. We'll crank it up so you can hear what it's doing at the extreme.
They can't help you. They can't help you, Max.
So just like a little bit of a wobble.
They can't help you, Max. They can't help you, Max.
So that gives you the idea there. So we didn't want too much of that. So around 10% seemed to be good. The next thing that we have is actually a plugin that I didn't end up using. So it's the Vintage Verb. And we can go ahead and I guess we will activate it and look at the settings that I used. The reason why I didn't end up using this plugin.
They can't help you, Max.
Despite the fact that it sounds really good, like
They can't help you, Max.
that kind of reminds me of the reverb that we do have in the reference, is the fact that built into this, there is no ducking. So I could set up a ducker myself and kind of create, like a parallel chain at this point. I just didn't want to do that. I wanted to keep it simple. So I decided to not go with this reverb, and you'll see that we introduce a different reverb here later on. But just as an FYI, that's kind of the reverb sound that you are going for. What I added next was a distortion, and this isn't doing as extreme of an effect as what you hear in the reference. So when the creature is speaking louder or really emphasizes a word, you actually hear that it does distort much more aggressively. So it's like an overdrive of a preamp of some kind. So to sort of emulate that, we've added the black box analog, what is this thing called? Analog design. And I just kind of set this to how I liked it. So in theory here, again, the harder, the signals coming in, the more the distortion is working, but this one's relatively clean. So it's actually not as extreme as what you hear in the reference, but you could use probably any kind of preamp and see if you can get something that sounds good when you're really hitting those emphatic words. So let's just take a listen.
They can't help you, Max. They can't help you, Max. They can't help you, Max. They can't help you, Max.
So specifically on words like Max, and let's see if there's something else.
There's a reason you hide from them.
Like this word.
You belong.
So what I would hope is that when we get to those, it drives in a little bit harder. Some of that too has to do with where you end up putting these things in the chain. So I could have maybe run a preamp in that first stage and tried to overdrive the preamp there before we did a lot of like the compression and the limiting and the sort of like fixing of frequencies, but it's all good. It still sounds nice. The next thing we are going to go into now is the reverb. And the reason why I went with this reverb is because there is a ducker built into it. So whenever the voice is actually speaking, the reverb does duck behind a little bit. That's useful for clarity, very common sort of technique when you need to do something like this. So let's take a listen.
They can't help you, Max. There's a reason you hide from them. There's a reason you hide from them. There's a reason you hide from them.
And you might think from watching the show or, having the same reference clip I have that the reverb is way bigger, but I found in listening to it a lot of times, the reverb is actually pretty subtle. It is just kind of putting it into a space. It's not trying to put it into this huge expanse like you might think. There's a lot of sound effects and other stuff going on that I think are drenched in heavier reverb, but the voice itself, not so much. So that's where we're at with the reverb. And then we're going into a delay. And with the Valhalla delay, luckily, there is a ducking option. So again, the ducking is really extreme, but probably the most significant thing on here is the fact that I'm using this diffusion little setting right here to add kind of even another texture of like unique reverb to that delay. And that also then helps with the space building. So let's go ahead and listen to this.
They can't help you, Max.
I don't think I want this.
There's a reason you hide from them. You belong here with me.
And just kind of like on the actual reference clip we have, you really only hear that delay when the creature's not speaking. So we're ducking that pretty aggressively to make sure that, again, we're keeping that clarity and not somehow messing with the intelligibility, but adding a unique space by introducing that delay. The next thing we have is a compressor. And I'm pretty sure I'm just on one of my favorite presets, Pro Voiceover. And I might have adjusted some things very slightly, but you could probably just use that preset and be good to go, just adjusting the threshold. So this is basically just to try to even all of this stuff out, including the reverb and the delay. So it's going to actually bring up the space that we've just created.
They can't help you, Max.
You can really hear that with the delay. And I'm fine with that.
There's a reason you hide from them. You belong here with me.
Nice. So that's just doing what you expect it to do. Nothing fancy, but important. Then we have the Dimension D from Arturia. And I can't remember if I actually went into the advanced panel and adjusted anything. I guess I maybe moved that to smooth and I played around with the actual width, but it doesn't look like I did too much of that. Again, the dry wet control is very big, and it looks like I have mode just one selected here. So again, it's going to be subtle, kind of like the first chorus, but this gives us more of that sort of true 80s analog-y vibe, which I'm just assuming was used. It probably wasn't, but it's Stranger Things, so you got to try to pay homage in any way you can.
They can't help you, Max. There's a reason you hide from them. They can't help you, Max.
Now, one thing to pay attention to, you probably keep hearing, or it's only audible now with the compressor and with this Dimension D, this little click or pop. We will address that at the very end or do the best we can with it. Just something to be mindful of always as you're going through. And then the next thing we have is another one of these like frequency shift effects where I'm using the symphonic mode and I've slightly, detuned the settings on the first and the second instance of it. Tiny bit of drive going in, and again, very low on the dry wet, some additional stereo width brought in. And let's go ahead and take a listen to what this is doing.
They can't help you, Max. They can't help you, Max.
And that for me was kind of the linchpin, that when you hear again in the voice on the reference, there's like this sort of like warble-y type of an effect that you can tell it's not natural, but it still sounds pretty organic. Like it's kind of this underwater swelly thing. And that's what this is doing for me. So this is really playing a very big role in getting that sort of unique timbre to the reference, or, close enough with what I'm trying to go for here.
They can't help you, Max. There's a reason you hide from them.
Okay, so let's go ahead and turn on the multiband now. This is really just for stereo width control. So everything below 100 hertz going into mono just to be safe. And then everything above that, I think I pushed out very subtly up to 120. So this is, again, just based on what I was hearing in the reference. Let's turn this on.
They can't help you, Max.
Very cool effect.
There's a reason you hide from them.
And then the final thing I'll just turn on for maybe one instance. When I bounce this out, I will obviously leave this on, but it is doing a lot of processing and introduces a ton of latency. But this is just our declicker. So it's going to listen for those little clicks and pops that have been introduced, I think mostly because of the plugins, or it's just enhanced it. And it should try to save us a little bit there. So let's go ahead and take a listen.
They can't help you, Max.
Still hear it a little bit.
There's a reason you hide from them. You belong here with me.
So it's only found 3 clicks to repair. As I was doing it before, sometimes it gets a little bit more, so I might actually increase the sensitivity a little bit. And we'll see if it can grab a few more of those clicks. But anyway, that's roughly the chain that we have. I'll go ahead and turn that off again. And now we'll do one pass where we just turn everything on and off and hear our difference. So here we go. Let's go ahead and turn those all off.
They can't help you, Max. There's a reason you hide from them. You belong here with me.
All right, now we'll turn everything on and take a listen.
They can't help you, Max. There's a reason you hide from them. You belong here with me.
Very cool. So the final thing we'll do is we'll try to get that click out of there. We're going to bounce it and then just do some final mixing type things, like the real final stage if you were actually working on a show or a movie or something. We're finally here and doing a little bit of mixing. We've really gone above and beyond with this, but just for the sake of like seeing techniques and understanding thought processes, here we are. So we're starting with a little bit of EQ.
They can't help you, Max. They can't help you, Max.
Mostly controlling the low end and getting rid of some of those subsonics. And when you're going through and you're working on these sorts of things, you always do want to kind of keep a frequency analyzer in mind. And
they can't help you, Max.
When you're looking across at something like this, you do want to be careful that you don't just see the low end really getting out of control, because in real life, you're going to be going through like limiters and things at the end. And if that low end is what's pounding through the most, that's what's going to be really working that limiter, and it can kind of ruin the rest of what's going on in that overall mix for the soundtrack. So just something to keep in mind. Then we're going into a Lufticus, and right as I say that, you can see that I've gone crazy there at the 40 hertz part. I'm just now trying to bring a little bit back of what that filter has cut off.
They can't help you, Max. They can't help you, Max.
Okay, so nothing major. So we'll go ahead and turn on and off the two EQs. These are, I think, the only two EQs that get used.
They can't help you, Max.
And off.
They can't help you, Max.
So really, it's just cleaned it up. The next thing we're doing is we're going into a compressor, another one from TDR. Very clean. I love this thing like on vocals. Really, this thing is great on anything if you just kind of need a clean compression. And you can also actually add in saturation if you want. So I really didn't change the default preset that much that just came in.
They can't help you, Max. They can't help you, Max.
Oop, wrong one. Here we go.
They can't help you, Max.
And then on.
They can't help you, Max.
And this one's great because it has both kind of a release control for the peak and for the RMS. So it will grab down some of those peaks and then also smooth out the overall level after that. So I find that dual stage release to be very nice for something like this. We are then going into a creative effect. So we're now going into the tall chorus, and you can see the dry wet is just at 15. We're only using mode 1. And stereo width, I don't think I really touched, or I brought it down just slightly. And the reason I brought this in was I felt it did a better job of like enhancing all of the stereo processing that we had done previously with like, you know, the flanger and also the various choruses we had used. So you're going to hear more of that frequency shifter and that flange characteristic start to come out.
They can't help you, Max. They can't help you, Max.
We're then going into a soothe, and we're really kind of emphasizing this one area where things get a little bit choppy.
They can't help
so you can see
Max.
This kind of is our main problem area.
There's a reason
specifically
you
there.
Hide from them.
And it was more for these second two phrases that I brought this in.
You belong here with me.
And we can hear that there is one issue on that word belong, and I think this probably got introduced with one of those ducking effects, and like the timing of it or the RX effect messed it up. So I've done a little bit of like just straight up volume.
You belong.
And that's helped pretty much as far as I think I would need it to if I actually had this thrown into a full-on mix, but whatever. If we had to, we could go back and figure out what was introducing that, but I didn't really want to. So anyway, that was one thing that I did notice and tried to address. We are then going into a limiter just to grab those peaks.
You belong here with me.
Okay, nothing major.
They can't help you, Max.
And then finally, we have our gain and kind of final tonal controls. So we're doing that same thing we did before, where for the higher band, and this time I set a higher cutoff frequency at 260, we're then just boosting the width a tiny bit. And then we're also adding more gain to the highs than to the lows. So let's take a listen.
They can't help you, Max. They can't help you, Max. They can't help you, Max. There's a reason you hide from them.
And I'm pretty happy with this.
You belong here with me.
The low end might still be a bit much, but all in all, I think we're pretty good. So let's go ahead and turn all of these on and off.
They can't help you, Max.
And our final result.
They can't help you, Max.
And the final thing you could consider doing, and I was playing around with this a little bit earlier, is again, you could come back and maybe subtly start to bring that pitch back up or have a pitch shifter or something.
They can't help you, Max.
In theory, this will mess with some of our settings though, because it's moving the fundamental around.
They can't help you, Max.
But even if we just did it subtly.
There's a reason you hide from them. You belong here with me.
But anyway, that is our end result here for our attempt at like Vecna processing. Let's go ahead and bounce it just so we can see what it looks like at the end. Should be a much smoother overall look. See those peaks kind of being brought back under control. That looks pretty good to me. And that is where we are going to end things for this video. So I hope that was useful and interesting for you. And if you ever need to kind of do some daemon processing, you now have a good place to start. Thanks for watching. Take care. Bye.